Good morning, everyone. And I just ask if you could take your seats. My name is Chris Bronlick. I'm president of the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy, and on behalf of the Virginia Manufacturers Association and the Virginia Energy Consumers Trust, I'd like to welcome both those here in the room and those sitting at home or in their office to this conference. Our goal was to create a conference that would be informative and to videotape it and to cut it up and make it available in an effort to inform Virginians throughout the state at all times on all issues. First, an apology. When we first scheduled this event, we consulted my handy Franklin planner, and it said that Yom Kippur started at sundown tonight. For the first time in 30 years, Franklin planner was wrong, and we discovered that too late to make the change. Now, I know there are a number of folks that who would have attended or watched online and are unable to do so in accordance with their faith, so I apologize profusely for that, and in the spirit of atonement, we will be making these sessions available to them at a future date. We do apologize. Secondly, although I have no doubt that there are those who will say otherwise, there is not a single one of our speakers who is a climate denier. What we believe, however, is that good public policy must be entered into with clear eyes about the costs to taxpayers and ratepayers, the real and complete data that should guide us, the limitations of corrective action, and the unintended consequences that will occur. Time and again, we've seen this policy fueled by emotion, and with only one set of data usually ends up being bad policy. Policymakers and the public that elects them should have all the facts. Without them, we head down the road in the wrong direction, and we owe it to our children and our children's children to ensure that society and government take actions based on facts that will preserve for them an affordable and cleaner world. But we believe you are not getting the full story in public deliberations. So you will hear some of it from us this morning. You will learn that your energy rates will go up by $800, as much as $800 a year. You will be told of the unreliability of an exclusive reliance on wind and solar and of their failures elsewhere. You will learn that this reliance requires the destruction of 500 square miles of Virginia forest and farmland, and you will be told of a proposal to force you to reduce your use of gasoline, engage in rationing at the wholesale level, and divert gas tax revenue away from road construction and repair. Now, no one has a better handle on the grand scope of this than our keynote speaker here today, who will be in recorded remarks. Anyone trying to pigeonhole Michael Shellenberger as an anti-environmentalist will have a hard time doing so. President of Environmental Progress, in 2008, Shellenberger was named a Hero of the Environment by Time magazine and won the Green Book Award from the Stevens Institute of Technology's Center for Science Writings that same year. His 2020 book, Apocalypse Now, and this is where I get to do my Johnny Carson routine, Why Environmental Alarmism Harms Us All, is an international bestseller, and it's been translated into 15 languages. Mr. Shellenberger was recently interviewed by Thomas Jefferson Institute Senior Fellow Stephen Hayner, and we have him recorded here now for the keynote. Thank you.
And thank you for being interested in these topics. Energy is obviously essential to many of the things that we all care about, both the future of our economy, the natural environment, national security issues are at work here. So we're at a very critical moment, a very critical crossroads in American energy policy. We're now seeing many of the consequences of over-reliance on weather-dependent energy sources, on renewables. We've had blackouts in California 3 years in a row that have all been directly related to the state's over-reliance on solar panels, manufactured in China, imported to California, no solution to the waste disposal issues. Nobody's really even thought about it. We're now seeing in Texas, they overinvested in wind energy, and they experienced a bad cold snap this winter, which should have been prevented had those resources been invested to weatherizing and winterizing the natural gas plants, and instead that money went into renewables. We've now seen over the last few months some very significant revelations about how solar panels are being manufactured in China. People thought that solar panels became cheaper because of greater efficiency in converting sunlight to electrons, to electricity. That's not the case. The efficiency improvements over the last 10 years have been about 2 to 3%. It's not very much. The prices came down for 3 reasons. The Chinese government massively subsidized the production of solar panels, tens of billions of dollars. It basically destroyed the solar industry in the United States and Europe. We now know that the Chinese have been making solar with the dirtiest form of energy on the planet, which is their very dirty coal energy. And we also now have revelations that the labor that has been used to make solar panels in the Xinjiang province in China is coerced forced labor. It's labor that is Muslim Uyghur labor. There's about 1 to 2 million Muslims that are in concentration camps. These are the words that the analysts use to describe it. The Biden administration has confirmed that this is genocide which is occurring in Xinjiang in China. This is where most of our solar panels come from. We've now seen that the German parliament, the Bundestag, has also said that this is evidence of genocide. And so there's been new restrictions placed on the import of solar panels, and the price is going to go up. We've also seen the Harvard Business Review published a study a few weeks ago showing that just the cost of safely disposing hazardous solar panel waste, all solar panels turn into hazardous waste at the end of their lifespan, which is 15 to 25 years. There is no plan to deal with that waste, and once you deal with the cost of the waste, the cost of electricity from solar ends up being 4 times higher than they had anticipated. We're also dealing with the consequences of the expansion of wind energy. Wind energy is even less reliable and predictable than solar energy. Everywhere in the world that significant amounts of wind energy is used, electricity prices go up. Germany and Denmark have the most expensive electricity prices in Europe. It's because of their heavy reliance on renewables. All you need to know about energy, I say, you can learn from Germany and France. These are 2 very similarly sized countries right next to each other. Germany spends almost twice as much for electricity that produces 10 times the carbon emissions as French electricity. And the reason is because France gets over 70% of its electricity from nuclear, and Germany has been phasing out nuclear and trying to ramp up renewables. I just wrote a column for Forbes. It's a phenomenon I also document in my book, Apocalypse Never, but I just published an article in Forbes a couple of days ago about how German carbon emissions went up 25% this year compared to the same period last year from the electricity sector. And part of it was the economic rebound post-COVID, but a big part of it was that wind energy produced 1/4 less electricity this year than it did last year. Why is that? It's because there wasn't very much wind. And so this keeps happening where they install more wind turbines, but there's just less wind. And so you realize that people had said, oh, we got 50% of our electricity from renewables in 2020. Well, they only got 43% in the first half of 2021. And that's not because they didn't have as many solar panels and wind turbines. They had more. It's just because of a change in the weather. So the final thing I'll add here is that those of us who really care about the natural environment, I was an advocate for renewables, but we kept finding local grassroots environmental groups that were opposing very large industrial wind and industrial solar projects off the coast of Cape Cod, in the California desert. We're now seeing desert tortoises are being killed to make room for industrial solar farms in the California desert. I changed my mind about renewables when I understood that they just require significantly more land. Princeton University just confirmed about 300 times more land on average to generate the same amount of electricity from a wind farm or a solar farm as from a natural gas or nuclear plant. So for those of us who are concerned about the natural environment, who are concerned about endangered species and biodiversity and want to see more land protected for those species, we really need to speak out against this overemphasis on weather-dependent industrialized solar and wind farms and really put a stronger emphasis on nuclear energy, which produces 0 carbon and can actually replace fossil fuels, and on abundant natural gas, which has been the main reason that the United States has reduced its carbon emissions 22% below 2005 levels, which is 4 percentage points more almost than what the U.S. committed to reduce them under Paris climate agreements and under cap and trade legislation, which never was implemented. So again, I want to thank you all for having me and for inviting me on. I think that what you all are doing in Virginia is extremely important in terms of getting America back on the right track in terms of energy and the environment.
Well, again, as you saw, and I shared the information with you, and you may have followed it when it happened, our legislature is all in on 5,200 megawatts of offshore wind, 2,700 miles off the Virginia Capes, off of Virginia Beach, and probably in the neighborhood of 13,000 megawatts of solar, of new solar. Some of it will be utility owned, some of it will be merchant generators, but tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of acres of solar. So, I mean, are you seeing around the country, are you seeing around the world that the public is waking up to these problems, or is the assumption just that there's no problem and it's full speed ahead?
No, there's active resistance to industrial wind farms everywhere in the world right now. In fact, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, just gave a speech where he recognized there's a huge movement against industrial wind farms in France. The movement against industrial wind in Germany has basically blocked the expansion of transmission lines and industrial wind farms. There's a movement in Nebraska to stop them from building transmission lines and industrial wind turbines in whooping crane habitat, which is bonkers because there's so few whooping cranes. It's this iconic, American endangered species that Audubon famously portrayed. We now see massive resistance to industrialized wind farms off the Atlantic coast of the United States. I was just in New Jersey where I gave a talk to a very large crowd, also in a talk in Martha's Vineyard, a very liberal place, a very progressive place, again, where the residents are starting to mobilize against these proposed wind farms. Well, why? Well, because this is habitat for the North Atlantic right whale, which is the most endangered whale species in the world. One of the things I pointed out in Apocalypse Never is that we've done a pretty good job saving the whales, mostly by not using them for their oil anymore or for their meat. And they've come back, the populations have come back. But 10 days after the publication of Apocalypse Never, they changed the listing of the North Atlantic right whale from endangered to critically endangered. I actually went back into the book and changed that one sentence to recognize that we still have whales that we need to save. There's only 100 breeding females of North Atlantic right whales in existence in the world, and they want to build large industrial wind farms right where those magnificent animals breed. Any loss of a species that has so few numbers, about 400 of those animals in total, it could be catastrophic for the species. It could lead to extinction. So I think that it's, look, the big wind industries have said that they don't think that project, offshore wind project, is a done deal. Politicians vote to do things all the time. For projects like that to work, they have to overcome a lot of environmental opposition, and environmental opposition is only growing right now. And people are starting to find each other. There's alliances being formed between people in New Jersey and Massachusetts. I'm sure that they'll reach out to the folks in Virginia so you all can work together. But one thing I'll say is that the fishing industry has done such a good job to change its practices over the last several decades to be more environmentally sensitive and to reduce their negative environmental impact. Well, you then go add a whole new massive industry on top of that, and it's going to completely devastate and really wipe out many of the gains that the fishing industry has made in terms of its ecological practices. So what we've seen now is really an alliance between the fishing industry and local conservationists to push back against these offshore wind plans, which could be really quite catastrophic, both for the North Atlantic right whale, but also for anybody who makes a living, harvesting scallops, lobsters, and all the incredible sea life that attracts people to the East Coast.
The Dominion project, it just filed on July 2nd for the beginning of its EIS process. But my understanding is that this administration, the Biden administration, is rapidly accelerating those reviews and may make it harder to use that process to raise those issues. I'm not sure if that's what you're finding, but there's been a lot of discussion that it's going to be kind of a fast track process for this project in Virginia.
I think that they say that. You have to remember, I was a supporter of Cape Wind, which was a proposed wind farm off the coast of Cape Cod. And I believe that the developer spent something like $100 million in 20 years trying to get that project done. And they couldn't get it done because there was so much grassroots environmental resistance to it. It was why I changed my own mind about renewables, is that how could I support destroying this beautiful scenic landscape, the scenic seascape, for an amount of energy that is less than half of the energy from a single nuclear reactor. We have 97, 98 nuclear reactors in the United States. It doesn't make any sense to go and destroy an incredible seascape for such a tiny amount of energy. So I think a lot of that's bluster. I don't think that you should, I think that we should actually accept them in their quieter moments. The wind industry acknowledges this is not a done deal. I mean, how are they going to justify all these cables and all this ship traffic to build this industrial wind farm when there's only 100 breeding females left of North Atlantic right whales? So I think the main thing that matters is really what people like you guys do. This is really your call to, I think, for people of Virginia and for people that really care about the natural environment as opposed to the idea of the natural environment, to really step up and make the case for these iconic species, for the fishing industry. Really, all that matters is that we find each other and that we make friends with each other and that we start to work together, because that's ultimately what all politics depends on. It just depends on us explaining to our fellow Americans that renewables have very significant environmental impacts, and that, I find that people are in a trance state. They're in an almost hypnotic state about renewables. They just think that they're something that they're not. They think that solar panels are magic and that they're made in some sort of high-tech industry rather than being made by basically enslaved people living in concentration camps. They think that industrial wind farms somehow harmonize us with the natural environment. They don't know that they threaten not just endangered whale species, but also all sorts of really spectacular, iconic, and endangered bird species, bats, insects. All are really potentially negatively impacted by the expansion of these really land-intensive and material-intensive energy sources.
One of the most interesting aspects of your book was the discussion of how various economic forces kind of behind the scenes were working to kill off America's nuclear industry, and unfortunately having a great deal of success, especially right there in your home state of California. Has that reversed at all? Is there any sign that the American public is turning back to nuclear as for both the energy density and the environmental aspects, or are we still fighting that battle that people are terrified of nuclear plants?
Oh, heavens no. We're seeing a huge change. I mean, I would say, including particularly among young people under 30 particularly, they don't understand why baby boomers are so paranoid about nuclear power. They think of it as kind of a joke. They just don't understand. I think it's important to remember that baby boomers and to some extent Generation Xers like myself were subjected to decades of misinformation. They were traumatized in the 1950s. Children were taught to hide under their desks. They were taught that nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants are the same things. There's one of the Simpsons creators is on Twitter right now expressing all sorts of concerns about nuclear waste, which is something that is literally why it should be. It's nuclear waste is what makes nuclear the best from an environmental point of view. It never hurts anybody, never will. Easy to store, as contrast to solar panel waste. So
easy to use. I mean, you can even reuse it in many cases.
Absolutely, we will reuse it. Of course, we will. It's just too valuable not to reuse. So I think that there is a huge shift that's occurred, including among people to the left of the spectrum, progressives. They have seen my TED Talks. My TED Talks on nuclear renewables have now been viewed over 7 million times. There's not really even a debate around the importance of nuclear in people that are knowledgeable about these questions. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before the American people realize what a special technology this is, why the United States has to stay involved in this technology. It does have a national security component to it. It's not the same thing as nuclear weapons, but we do need to have a nuclear scientific and technical community to support. And I would just say, I think there's a lot of people that have been battling wind turbines around the country and solar farms in their backyards, and they've never really understood why nuclear power is important. But when a nuclear power plant shuts down and all the money flows into building out wind and solar farms and carbon emissions go up, I do think people start to understand that you need nuclear, if only to protect communities from the onslaught of industrial wind and solar plants.
Another good aspect of key aspect of your book was a description of what's going on in the third world and how much environmental damage is being done simply because of the poverty folks face and the need to use animal waste and basically just biomass in various forms to heat their homes, to cook their food, and making the point, which I think is often missed, that for those folks to move to fossil fuels and an organized grid and a real electric system is a huge environmental uptick. It's an advantage. It's not a disadvantage. It's going to improve the overall environment, and preventing fossil fuels in those cases is a disaster.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest environmental problem in the world is that there's still 2 billion of our fellow human beings who are trapped in back-breaking agrarian poverty in Africa, Asia, Latin America. They use wood as fuel, which contributes to very terrible lung diseases because they breathe smoke in cooking, but it also destroys forests. They have to eat wild animals for survival. They do very low efficiency agriculture. When you interview people around the world in those communities, they would love to have a job in the city. They would love to move to the city and work in a factory or in an office building or something, because that's how women and children achieve freedom. It's how we get greater freedom for persecuted minorities. It's a really benevolent process of both economic progress and environmental progress. And so for me, as an environmentalist, I look at rainforest destruction, low intensity agriculture, the use of wood fuel as the biggest environmental problem without a doubt. And it's really shameful that many of my fellow environmentalists have spent several decades trying to prevent poor countries from getting access to modern fuels, to natural gas, to hydroelectric dams, to nuclear power plants. It's unconscionable. It's how people lift themselves out of poverty. We should really be outraged by that. And it's notable to me that the same people trying to shut down nuclear power plants are the same people trying to stop poor countries from getting hydroelectric dams or from getting natural gas plants. I think it's really got an anti-human flavor to it. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. And what I hoped with Apocalypse Never is that people will be able to see how all these things are connected, why defending nuclear power plants in rich countries, defending the right of poor countries to use fossil fuels so they can develop are all one and the same in terms of they're all a single part of a humanistic approach to the environment, a pro-human approach to the environment. And I think the way to think about all of this is that energy density determines environmental impact. So we move from wood to coal to petroleum to natural gas to uranium. Every step along the way, you're using less natural resource. You're using the environment less, and you're producing more energy. We want more energy, and we want less natural resource consumption. So you're trying to increase energy density to reduce material intensity, material throughput, and therefore waste as well.
So looking forward, what are the technologies that are in the works that show some promise, that could, again, create some very low carbon or no carbon choices? Is there indeed a reason to look towards hydrogen? Is there indeed a reason to look towards some of these other technologies, or is the best move to go forward with the proven ones we have now?
Yeah, I mean, in the book I describe in the 1950s and early 60s, most people understood that the positive environmental future required moving from coal to natural gas and then eventually to nuclear. We would have these nuclear power plants that produce both fresh water from seawater through desalination, that would produce hydrogen first from natural gas and then from water, that would produce fertilizer, that would recycle the wastewater from cities into fresh drinking water, which is what a very big nuclear plant in near Phoenix, Arizona does. So a positive, the truth of the matter is there's no reason the human environmental footprint shouldn't decline significantly over the next 50 years. We're already using much less land for growing food and producing meat than we were 20 years ago. As we move from coal to natural gas, our air pollution and carbon emissions have been declining in the United States for 15 years. They've been declining in Europe since the mid-70s as they've moved from coal to natural gas and nuclear. Eventually, we will go from the use of natural gas as for cooking, heating, and transportation to using hydrogen gas. It's going to take a while. Look, long term, probably 100 or 200 years from now, Even our jet planes will be powered by hydrogen fuel. They'll fly like rockets, and we'll be able to go from New York to Australia in an hour. Similarly, we'll have even more futuristic nuclear power plants, but all things in their time. And for now, we have perfectly good nuclear energy technologies that we should be expanding. In 100 years, we'll switch to the kinds that Bill Gates is proposing. We'll switch to hydrogen fuel cell cars. It's not going to be electric cars. They're too heavy. They use too many materials. They're not efficient. It's a big, I think it's a disaster waiting to happen in many ways. I think there's some uses of lithium batteries that are really positive, like in our laptop computers and our cell phones and even in bicycles. But cars and trucks and things like that, they're going to require much more energy dense fuels. So I think the main thing here is just that we need to get our heads right. We need to evolve our consciousness, as environmentalists in the 60s like to say, and we need to have this positive view of a world where all 8 billion, going on 10 billion people can live high energy lives, but with reduced environmental impact, because we're moving up the energy ladder and we're producing more food and products using less materials because we're so much more efficient at it.
You hinted at you sort of mentioned the move to the battery, and there are two elements of this in Virginia that have not really gotten a lot of exploration. One, of course, is going to be a huge push to create storage to go along with the renewable. But the other push that's sort of being ignored is that behind the scenes, there's also a very large push from these folks not dealing with electricity, but dealing with everything else in the economy. There are indeed places in this country where you can no longer connect a house to a natural gas line. You can no longer connect a factory to a natural gas line. We've had in Virginia here major battles over pipelines, and frankly, the environmentalists have won them all over the last 5 years. Stepping away from the electricity sector, what are the pitfalls of trying to electrify every other aspect of our economy?
Look, I think, it's ironic because honestly, among energy experts, there's a pretty strong agreement that we first need to decarbonize electricity before we're going to decarbonize transportation, heating, and cooking, which are the other major uses of energy in our society. So my view is let's scale up nuclear from its current 19% to 50% by 2050, go to 75% by 2075. Along the way, we can provide some amount of energy in terms of hydrogen for these other end uses like heating, cooking, transportation. But lithium batteries are a very heavy metal alternative, chemical alternative that do not provide the power densities that hydrogen fuel cells require, or even gasoline require. They obviously don't allow the refueling. So I'm concerned by this overemphasis on electric cars. I think if you're rich and you can afford a Tesla, that's fine. Go ahead and pay for it. I don't know why we're subsidizing them. I don't know why my neighbors in the Berkeley Hills, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the United States, I don't know why I'm subsidizing my neighbors to have solar panel systems and Tesla cars. It's regressive. Every time you're subsidizing solar panels, it's regressive because only more affluent people can afford big solar systems on their rooftops. So I think that one thing is to get back in touch with some sensitivity for taking care of our fellow human beings, our fellow Americans. I think we've allowed a kind of apocalyptic view of climate change, which is obviously erroneous, to cloud our thinking. Climate change is real and we should take action on it, and we are taking action on it. We've reduced our emissions 22% since 2005, mostly by fracking for natural gas to replace coal. But this idea that somehow we need to start using electric cars, we need to make energy expensive, all of that's taking us in the wrong direction. We made our emissions go down in the United States by making energy cheaper, not by making it more expensive. We made natural gas more abundant and cheaper. We need to do the same thing with nuclear power. All of these proposals, which require making energy more expensive, which require increasing dependence on China-made solar panels or on wind turbines constructed around the world, it's a terrible mistake. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for America's national security.
This has been wonderful. It's been very illuminating. If you could take 1 minute and mention any websites or other sources you think our viewers or our audience should go to
Yeah, I would just say please read Apocalypse Never. It's a best-selling book. It's been translated into 15 languages. If you haven't read it, please buy a copy. If you have read it and you liked it, please buy copies for friends and relatives. It's important in particular for young people to read the book. I dedicated it to my children. I wrote it at a high school reading level, so most people should be able to read it pretty easily. It's full of really interesting stories and characters. The second thing is you can go to our website, environmentalprogress.org, to discover all of the facts and figures and data that I'm describing. And then check out my TED Talks, Why Renewables Can't Save the Planet, Why I Changed My Mind About Nuclear. It also provides all of the information and the facts and figures that I've laid out here today.
This is where I say thank you to a screen. We're now going to move to the live portion of our program, and we're going to group our speakers by topic a bit. And just to give you an idea of the arc of the narrative for the next 90 minutes or so, our next session will be on the Virginia Natural Resources Scorecard, taking a look at where we are in Virginia and what our trajectory will be if we do nothing else. We'll then move to transportation issues, Transportation and Climate Initiative, electric vehicles, the cost and practicality issues of both. Our next session would be on the Virginia Clean Economy Act, the use of solar panels, the use of wind turbines, what those costs are and what those benefits and negatives would be. And finally, we'll sum this all up with other elements, including sort of a compilation of the cost of what's being expected of you over the next 15 or 20 years. Our next speaker, I'll introduce two of them. Our next speaker is Brett Vassy, who's President and CEO of the Virginia Manufacturers Association, representing 5,800 employers who are keeping more than 230,000 Virginians working and building a future for themselves and their families. He served on a variety of Virginia State Advisory Councils and was a member of the Virginia Power 500. Mr. Vassy has made the interests of Virginia energy consumers a paramount interest of his. From my point of view, his most important role is as president of the Virginia Craft Brewers Guild, but that's another story. Our speaker immediately following him will be David Hudgens, who is executive director of the Virginia Energy Consumer Trust, an organization working to restore the voice of the Virginia energy consumer in legislation, regulation, and executive action. He served for 25 years, ending his service as Director of External Relations for a 3-state generation and transmission cooperative, the Old Dominion Electric Cooperative, and has served on numerous task forces, forums, and study groups over his career. Brett, you're up.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to TJI and to the Trust for the partnership in today's event. I think you're going to get a lot of information, so buckle up. This is going to be fast, lots of information, but we are recording it, as we said, and you'll get an opportunity for replay. Setting the table on data, right-sizing data is important to this discussion. And what I'm going to do is go through the Virginia Natural Resources Scorecard for you. Why? Environmental activists have been successful in connecting U.S. and Virginia energy and environmental policies and regulations to global climate concerns. To do so, they have to establish a narrative that the environment is getting worse and it's never been as bad as it is today. Further, the same advocates have to establish a simplistic but false binary choice for legislators and consumers: support the environment or support the economy. The VMA and other organizations, including TJI and the Trust, firmly believe in American ingenuity and that we can be both environmental stewards and economically competitive in any endeavor. So this false binary choice also involves empirical measurements of pollution and no consideration of energy justice, which we define as affordable, reliable, secure, and sustainable energy sources for all consumers. So rather than reinvent the wheel in developing a system of metrics and communicate Virginia's year-over-year performance on environmental and energy issues, the VMA, the Virginia Industry Foundation, and the Virginia Energy Consumer Trust, we have decided to partner to take over the publication of the successful Virginia Natural Resources Scorecard that ceased publications in 2017. The new Natural Resources Scorecard will measure air quality, water quality, energy, and solid waste and recycling. Today, we're going to talk about some of the findings, initial findings. Literally, they were just completed 2 days ago, so no one else has heard this information. This 2.0 scorecard will also include relative ranking for each metric against the 49 other states and aggregated comparisons against the northeastern states, southern states, and the West Coast states. We chose these comparisons because in today's political environment, nearly all energy and environmental policies are derived from or compared to those regions. However, there are a few times where the competitive position of Virginia against its southern states is considered. Very few times are we actually in a consideration for how we compete against southern states. But we thought it was important to provide policymakers with clearer data, all derived from U.S. government sources. No studies, no polls, no fluff. This is actual data. So today, we'll present a few of the data points on the energy and environment sections of the Scorecard 2.0. The final scorecard will be published in the coming weeks. And I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but you should be able to see it and how to read it. Blue are northeastern states, red are southern states, yellow is Virginia, and green is West Coast. So as you see, when we look at total energy consumption per capita, we have done very well in 2019. It's actually a very good news story. Total electricity production from coal has also been reduced by 86% since 1990. Total electricity production from petroleum has been reduced 82% since 1990. That's probably the first time you've ever heard that statistic. And nuclear biomass and renewables have grown substantially. Natural gas, though, is the major change. And we're going to talk about the environmental impacts of that, as you've already heard from our keynote speaker. We have gone from 1.1 million megawatt hours of natural gas in 1990, electricity generation, to 57 million. That's an amazing story. While the economy is also, it's now at about 60% of electricity generation in Virginia is from natural gas. How we compare, you can see the reduction since 1990. I told you about the aggregated number. You can see how Virginia has done. Virginia has done remarkably well against comparisons of our southern states. We have done better than our northeastern states. And in the West Coast, they have done remarkably well as well. So on the energy side, we're also going to go into electrifying the transportation sector. The best way to measure that is electric vehicle registrations. And we are now adding to the scorecard that vehicle registration number. You can see how we compare, again, against those regions. We're right in the middle to the upper 50 percentile. We're doing very well as far as electric vehicle registrations are concerned. But when we talk about the entire electrification of the vehicle, all vehicles registered, let me give you one final statistic. In Virginia, 0.3% of all vehicles are electric. 0.3%. Nationally, it's 0.4%. Our General Assembly has now set a goal by 2035, 100%. It is factually impossible to reach that goal. So let's talk about air quality. Air quality is an important part and directly connected to energy generation. And these are some of the major air quality measurements and the reductions from 2014 to 2017 that we wanted to share with you. VOCs in tons. You can see how we were able to perform over that period of time. NOx down, mercury down, HAZ down, and criteria air pollutants all down. To give you an idea on some of those, hazardous air pollutants in particular we're going to go into, and criteria air pollutants. And let me give you some of those a little later, but let me start with CO2, because this is what we hear about all the time. So we wanted to give you a comparison as well of how did we do in CO2 emissions compared to these states, and you can see we're in yellow. How did we do? We actually beat many of the blue states in the Northeast. We beat the national average, which is in white, and we beat almost every single southern competitor with the exception of Florida and North Carolina. And when you look at metric tons of CO2 per person reduction from 1990 to 2018, Virginia outperformed the northeastern states and the West Coast substantially. And the southern states, as a group, we beat every other region, including the national average. You will never hear that, though, in any of the discussions about why we need to go to the Green New Deal in Virginia. I'll also say one other point. When we talk about CO2, we're also learning a lot from Schollenberger and others who are doing global research on this issue. And to give you one statistic that was just published a few weeks ago, the top 25 cities in the country are 52% of the planet's urban greenhouse gas emissions. And here's a further statistic, is almost all of those are in one country, China. So we have a lot to do when we look at the global emissions, and out of the 75 top emitters of global CO2 emissions, only 5 were in the United States. So those are facts that we're trying to make sure that folks understand, and then they can localize these. Criteria air pollutants, again, those are things like mercury, nitrogen oxide, VOCs, GHGs. Very interesting, we're right in the middle, doing very well, outperforming West Coast states significantly. Hazardous air pollutants, average exposure to particulate matter, that leads to asthma, other chronic illnesses. Virginia is leading the pack. Look at how well we're doing on that. We're in the front of the pack, exceeding all southern states, exceeding the nation, exceeding the West Coast, and only 5 northeastern states are ahead of us. Remarkable story. And then finally, I want to bounce back to CO2, and I want to give a little reference to one of our peer organizations that did some great work in this area comparing CO2 emissions from 1990 for manufacturers, of course near and dear to my heart. And the manufacturing sector is oftentimes positioned as the sector that is, after energy, is actually the dirtiest, quote, energy producer, CO2 emissions producer, but the reality is 23% reduction in CO2 emissions for the manufacturing sector, and in that same time period, our gross state output increased 112%. So think about more production, less emission, and leading the nation among other emitters. It's a good news story, but you can see it all across the board. And then finally, everything has a price tag, and our next speaker is going to talk about that. We think it's important to understand under energy justice the affordability for all consumers, not just low-income individuals, all consumers. And so when you look now at the price per kilowatt hour of electricity in Virginia in 2019, again, the U.S. average being right there, the yellow being Virginia, you can see that we have done well on price. But when you compare us, again, these aggregated numbers into these regional comparisons, we actually are losing ground significantly when it comes to the industrial and the residential consumer. We are no longer as competitive as we were, and we are losing ground on a daily basis. And what our bigger concerns are is when you look at affordability and you look at the environmental picture, again, when you're told that it can't be worse and any price tag's worth it, the data doesn't show it. We are doing a great job on the environmental front. We can always do better, but that binary choice of be an environmentalist or be for the economy, it's just a false choice. And at the end of the day, when we're given examples of the Northeast and the West Coast as what to emulate in energy policy, the reality is they have set up a system that is less performing than we are. The environmental impacts are no better than ours for the most part, and their price tags are significantly greater. One final data point, if I just give it to you now, for the northeastern states for residential electricity per kilowatt hour, the average now is 17 cents. In Virginia, it's 12. For industrial, in the Northeast, it's 10.2. In Virginia, it's 6.8. So the evidence, the data is very, very clear. What we have to do is tell our story more and often, and that's what the scorecard is about, is an empirical set of data that is not from a study, it's not fluff, it's factual, it's defensible, and we'll show over time how we have compared to these regions. So that's what the scorecard is about. Our next speaker is going to talk about these issues in a more granular point of view, really getting into the application of policy and energy. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for joining us today.
All right, I've been schooled in changes in the schedule that I didn't know about. So Mr. Hudgens will be coming up at this point, but he'll be preceded by Steve Hayner. Steve is the senior fellow for the Thomas Jefferson Institute. He's also the person who put together all the moving parts for this morning's conference. His deep dive into energy policy began when he became manager of state government affairs for the Newport News Shipbuilding Company, which is a major nuclear company, the state's largest federal contractor, and a major energy consumer. In 2007, he was part of the negotiating team that returned Virginia's electric utilities to state regulation and has participated in and written about major legislative deliberations since then. And he's going to be speaking about a subject dear to his heart, the Transportation and Climate Initiative.
Thank you very much, and appreciate you all being here. So, as he said, we're going to get a little more granular with this one, and it's also important, going back to Brett's slide, to think about the Northeast, think about those northeastern states, because the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is pending in Virginia but has not yet been approved, will make us even more a part of those northeastern states. So what is TCI? And I've been writing about it now for a couple of years, and I think we've been successful in holding it off. I think but for some of the efforts we've been pushing, it already would have passed by now. If Virginia joins TCI, and I think after this next election, depending on what happens, Virginia will join TCI or it will not. The sale of gasoline and the sale of diesel in the state is immediately capped. In 2023, whatever's being sold, you can't sell any more than the year before. Not only is it capped, but it begins to be rationed, and the amount of gasoline and diesel will begin to shrink by 3% a year. Every wholesaler will have to buy basically a state allowance to sell every gallon of gasoline or diesel. The supply continues to shrink. If the economy continues to grow, the simple laws of supply and demand tell you what's going to happen to that carbon price, which is in essence nothing but a carbon tax. To put things in context, in Virginia, 4 billion gallons of gasoline were used basically in 2019 and 1.5 billion gallons of diesel. So they want to cut out 1.2 billion gallons of gasoline and 500 million gallons of diesel and run our economy in 20 years on that much less fuel. It's an interstate compact. Let's see. It's an interstate compact that's going to need to be approved by the General Assembly. Again, I expect it to come up in 22, especially if the same party stays in power. The effort began in 2010, but Virginia just joined under Governor Northam. It runs from New England all the way down to North Carolina, although North Carolina, I'm not sure I'd expect them to join. It has 3 goals. Number 1, as I said, to reduce carbon emissions by 30% over 10 years. Number 2 is to raise a bunch of money. I think that's principally become the main motivation, is to raise a bunch of money through that carbon tax, 100% of which will come to the state. And the third is to basically spend a third of that money or more on what they refer to as overburdened and underserved communities. So again, they want to spend a lot of this money on low-income families and other of the goals there. The organizing entity and the people who've been behind this and raised all the money, folks at the Georgetown University Climate Center. And I would recommend, if you're interested in this, to go find, just look it up online, Transportation and Climate Initiative. There's quite a lot of information out there. So again, Virginia, the state would take over that gasoline and fuel market. It would control, the supply. The allowance process is going to be burdensome for the distributors. It's going to be complicated for distributors that operate in more than one state, and that's the case of a lot of the folks in Virginia. They cross back and forth across state lines. As the supply shrinks, you'll start to see some constraints. And again, it's a market-wide competition. So a Virginia dealer who wants to, or a Virginia wholesaler who wants to buy allowances is competing against New England states, competing against some of the Middle Atlantic states, and whoever's willing to pay the most for that allowance is going to get that allowance. And so there's no guarantee that Virginia will have the same number of gasoline gallons sold and the same shrinking of its percentage as those other states. If they're willing to pay more for it, they'll get the supply. The compact, like a lot of the cap and trade operations, does have a floor price and a ceiling price. When the floor price is reached, if they don't raise enough money through the carbon tax, they start to reduce the number of allowances allowed. So if people are not paying a certain amount for those allowances, they take away allowances and force the price back up. There is a ceiling to protect folks from a spike, but that ceiling, as you will see, is pretty high. I use the word rationing to describe this. I get pushback when I use the word rationing to describe this, but that's exactly what this is. This is the government saying, here's this commodity, popular, in demand, plenty of it available, but you can't buy it because we've told you how much you can have. And you can go fight over the supply, but the supply is going to shrink. That is, per se, rationing. The good news is that the TCI program so far, after 10 or almost 11 years of effort, is a flop. No one has imposed it. The New Hampshire and Maine dropped out, and I'll tell you why Maine dropped out in a minute. In December of last year, 3 state governors and the mayor of the District of Columbia signed a piece of paper saying they intended to impose TCI in their states. But in Connecticut and in Rhode Island, the legislatures balked this year. They wouldn't do it. They decided not to put it forward. They didn't have the votes. They never came to a direct vote in either state. The state of Massachusetts is doing it under administrative authority, and that governor is eager to proceed, but he has basically no one to do it with. The District of Columbia has, I think, started the process, but has not actually implemented the process. So right now, Massachusetts by itself won't do it on its own, and it's not in place anywhere. In 2020, we worked with the legislature, put some legislation in, and basically forced a commitment from the Northam administration that they would not do this through the regulatory process, that they would do it basically by vote of the General Assembly. And again, this is an interstate compact, one of many Virginia would join, and interstate compacts by law are approved or broken by the General Assembly. But we've also had bills before the legislature requiring a legislative vote, and those bills were killed. Straight party line votes. So again, I would say there's reason to believe that a new administration could proceed with doing it administratively, could proceed to try and do this without actually asking for a vote of the legislature. So how much money are we talking about? And this is money that would come out of every person's pocket, every family, every business. Again, it's an additional gas tax. It's easy to convert because they sell it, you basically impose it as tons per CO2, but it basically works out to very close to 100 gallons of gas produces a ton of CO2, so it's not hard to do the math on what this would cost at the pump. When TCI advocates are talking about it, they say, oh, it's 5 cents a gallon. It's 5 cents a gallon. It's nothing. Nobody will notice it. When the Georgetown climate folks, however, ran their own models about 18 months ago, they came up with 17 cents a gallon. They saw a carbon price of 17 cents a gallon to impose the kind of controls they wanted. Their own draft MOU for the very first year of the program, sets a carbon price of a minimum of 6 cents a gallon and a maximum of 12 cents a gallon. So even in the first year, it could go as high as 12 cents a gallon before that ceiling kicks in and tries to control the price. And for the last year of the first 10 years, the price goes as high as 30 cents a gallon. This is in their document. So when they say 5 cents a gallon, they're not being honest. Thomas Jefferson Institute 2 years ago paid a New England research firm to do a study on our own, and those folks came up with an estimate of 33 cents a gallon on gasoline and 28 cents a gallon on diesel. Now, this was a price that's projected to basically get them what they want, a 30% reduction. That's the model price you need to change vote driver behavior. And that makes perfect sense because people are pretty tied to their gasoline and their diesel. They also estimated what the impact might be on a family household. Again, the price is not just what you pay at the pump. It's that money working its way through everything in the economy that relies on transportation. And they said more than $700 a family would be the impact once this thing is fully implemented. In a recent Richmond Times-Dispatch column, an advocate for TCI, and they're still out there, even though it's very quiet in Virginia, an advocate for TCI said it would be $3 billion over 10 years. They were talking about all the wonderful things they would do with $3 billion over 10 years. So again, a $3 billion tax over 10 years. What are they going to spend it on? Well, they're going to spend it on everything but highway maintenance and construction. In fact, and this is a key point, if they succeed in driving people away from gasoline and diesel, well, those are the main sources for highway funds. That's where we pay for our gas, for our transportation system. So you'd have to come up with millions and millions of dollars to replace those lost gas tax revenues as well. Because even if you're driving an electric car, you still got to have a road, you still got to have a bridge. So again, they will spend it on electric vehicles, they will spend it on bike lanes, they will spend it on other programs for those inner city communities, they will spend it on, I'm sure they would want to spend it on weatherization and energy efficiency programs in those communities. They'll spend it on everything except roads and bridges, which is what we like to see our transportation dollars spent on. Or even, and I suspect a lot of it would go to mass transit. The MOU that Virginia would have to sign basically hands off control of a lot of this money to this advisory board, an equity advisory body, quote, with a majority of members being representatives of overburdened and underserved communities or populations. So again, a $3 billion pot of money handed off to that advisory group, appointed, I'm sure, by whoever the governor happens to be. So why hasn't it worked in Virginia? Why has it basically been very quiet in Virginia? Well, I say, number one, I didn't put this on the slide. Number one is because nobody's talking about it. Neither party is bringing it up, and I think between now and November, I hope somebody does. But mainly, as you know, in 2020, the governor passed and the General Assembly voted for a major gas tax increase. And passing a second gas tax increase through TCI became politically pretty hard to justify. So again, I think a decision was made to wait and see what happened in this election and move forward. Another problem they've got to deal with is when Georgetown did its modeling, it looked at driver behavior and economic forces that are already in the marketplace and discovered that while they're looking for a 30% reduction in gasoline use over the next 10 years, it's already happening. People by choice and with the existing programs are moving to electric vehicles, moving to hybrids, and they project that fuel use would go down 18, 19% over the same 10 years if they do nothing at all. So the whole thing of TCI just adds another 10% on top of that. And then it really becomes a question, is this tax, is this rationing actually getting you anything if people are already moving that way voluntarily? Finally, the environmental justice folks have woken up to the fact that this hits the little guy very, very hard. They have came out last year, a woman up in New Jersey was on one of their TCI calls. She was recorded saying that it was just a tax on poor people to pay for rich people's electric cars, and that kind of went viral. And I think that did a lot of damage as well to what's going on. There are a couple of other issues with TCI that I think we need to focus on. Number one is leakage. Again, Virginia joins, but Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, and maybe North Carolina are not members. Well, it's real simple. You just go across the line and buy your gas and save the tax. That's an issue for the dealers, because the Virginia dealers right on the state line would suddenly have a price substantially higher than their competitors across the state line. You know, they promise to use the money for mass transit, for electric vehicles, for alternatives like that, but that doesn't do you a whole lot of good in some of these rural areas. You know, it doesn't do a lot of good for some guy who has chosen to live 25 miles outside of Richmond and commute. Well, they're not going to give him a bus. He's going to have to pay this price, and it's going to be politically very unpopular. Now the folks in Massachusetts, even though their governor wants to go forward, they found a way to slow it down. They're going to put it on a referendum, and they have approved a referendum for 2022. I think a lot of the other TCI states are going to stand around and watch and see what happens in that referendum. But I also think they're going to stand around and see if it comes up as an issue in Virginia, and if so, what happens. There have been places in the country, Maine being one of them, I mentioned Maine, where a candidate for governor got tagged with being in favor of this and lost the election. So it does happen that people who have come out for this, when it gets shown as a gas tax, they lose the election. And finally, we've had some discussion about this. They claim a lot of environmental benefits. They claim this is going to reduce PM 2.5, no more lung cancer, no more asthma, no more lung diseases. Those claims are largely bogus. I mean, they just can't bear it up with the evidence that they've got. Virginia, as Brett mentioned, does not have a particulate matter problem. The particulate matter problem that we have has been getting better, and it's just not an issue. So again, this is something that Thomas Jefferson's been working on for some time. I have a little video I want to show. This is something we put together with the help of the gasoline and convenience store folks here in Virginia. And roll it, please.
TCI, or the Transportation Climate Initiative, would really put a burden on everyone. Right now, the Virginia fuels tax is 28 cents per gallon. In 2021, it's due to go to 33 cents. If TCI goes through, we'd be over 50 cents a gallon. So then your cost of transportation is going to go up. I mean, your goods and services will certainly go up.
We have 300 employees, 200 are full-time. We serve the southern border of Virginia. The TCI tax increases will push our customers to buy more in North Carolina instead of Virginia. It puts our consumers and businesses at a disadvantage to their surrounding states. The TCI proposed taxes have an unfair impact on low-income communities. The tax increase really hurts the little guy. It would dramatically increase their transportation cost.
TCI is bad for rural Virginians, bad for small businesses, and it will seek to put us out of business. I think it really puts an undue hardship on everyone.
That petition is still up. You can find that video on our YouTube page. There is a Thomas Jefferson Institute YouTube channel. We don't have a lot on there, but by all means you can visit that. And I'll just go ahead and introduce my friend David Hudgens and let him move right into the next. You heard the introduction when Chris was up earlier, and he'll be talking a little bit more about some of those issues. So if you gentlemen are ready for the next number 4.
Thank you, Steve. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank the Thomas Jefferson Institute for you guys putting this together along with the Virginia Manufacturers Association. This new Virginia Energy Consumer Trust was formed to push back against this idea that we can standardize on one fuel, electricity. It is the most craziest idea on the face of the planet because it can't be done. And nobody uses a single source of failure. And this is what these people are trying to do. I mean, look at national security. We have a triad: submarines, land, airplanes. Not one source of failure. And we run our businesses like that. We never held hostage. But look at what these guys are trying to do. We be on one source to monopolies. And what go wrong with that when they control the single source of power in the state? That's Dominion, that's the co-ops, that's AEP, all monopolies. So some companies got very concerned because it looked like it was all talk, but now it's moving forward to 2035 of things that we've been talking about is coming to fruition. So that's why I'm here. And like Michael said, the wind, I'm just going to go real quickly because wind is not my thing, so to speak, but it continues to be cheaper, it gets more efficient, but where does it run into is that immutable laws of physics, and the physical boundary for silicon is a max conservation of 34%. And this is called the Shockley-Queisner limit. State-of-the-art PVs today is 26%. So no matter how much engineering, how much to tweak, that is the immutable law of physics. Same thing with wind technology. They continue to be more, these things now are the size of the Washington Monument. Bigger, it's more efficient, but the physical boundary of a wind is called the Betz limit. What is the max capture of 59.3% of kinetic energy in moving the air? You can't build any taller, you can't build them with, instead of 300-foot blades, you have 600-foot blades. That's the maximum that you get out of the wind because you would literally take all the energy out of the wind and it wouldn't blow. So therefore, it stands at 59.3, and that's another immutable law of physics. You cannot, at this point in life, that we know no other ways to provide energy that is as dense as fossil fuels. And I'm going to have some examples. And for the batteries, the logistic chain is the Achilles heel of batteries. You need 3 to 6 barrels of oil, that's the energy equivalent, that's about 41 gallons of oil, to construct a battery to store the energy equivalent of 1 gallon of gasoline. So the example being used is if you bought a 2020 Civic with a 12.4 gallon that weighs 77.5 pounds of gas, take you 360 miles. Pull up, 3 minutes later, you leave. But if you buy a Chevy Bolt with the same weight battery as the gasoline, you get 21 miles out of it. 21 miles for the same energy the gasoline gives. So to get the same mileage, you need a 1,334-pound battery to deliver 360 miles. And why is that? Because it's energy density. Lithium is 700 watt hours per kilogram. The density of petroleum is 12,000 watt hours per kilogram. That's why these things are eventually going to fail. So what engineers do, they put the cars on a diet, substituting carbon fiber and aluminum from steel to make it lighter. Cars lighter, takes less energy. But where are we coming into this at the end of the day is the logistics train to make batteries work. Nobody talks about it. Environmentalists talk about it when your car is delivered to you off the lot and how energy efficiency it is. But 80% of the battery, of a battery-driven car is in the logistics train of carbon. And it's exact reverse for the Civic that's with a gasoline motor. 80% of it is the production and burning of gasoline. But now here's the key. They all burn and emit the same carbon. In other words, the very idea of EVs is to cut the carbon footprint. So liars figure, figures lie. So you're going to go and cut the weight of the battery. And what do? You substitute a half ton of aluminum, and that's literally adds 6 tons of carbon to the logistic tail. And what does a nickel cobalt battery at 1,000 pounds require? 1 ton of ore. And that's going to, 5 tons, 6 tons, 36 tons, 10 tons, and all of these extractions of the ore to get these pounds of product requires heavy diesel equipment. And I'm talking the things that you see on TV where the tire is 10 foot tall and costs $26,000 each. The other thing that people don't realize, those things last for decades. So there's not going to be no wholesale change out of construction equipment because that's what, they cost like $250,000 to $500,000 and they run on for decades. So it all adds up for these batteries to move 250 tons of earth to attain 50 tons of ore to extract the desired minerals. That's for one battery. And we're talking in the United States last year, because of the pandemic, sold 15.1 million cars and only 261,000 EVs. So the point of all of this is that logistics tail, that over half the batteries are produced in China that has, absolutely the dirtiest energy on the planet. I've been over there, seen it for myself. At one plant, and this was an older plant, they had literally a screen. It literally looked like rat wire on the stack. And you wonder why everybody in China wears masks. Getting better, but that was like that for decades. And what they would do, literally, is send somebody up the stack, get a pole, and shake the screen. I mean, it was just appalling. But China produces half the batteries and the chemicals, and it's all produced with coal. And they put on 53 coal plants this year, and they put on 51 coal plants last year, and the year before, and the year before, because that's what 1.3 billion people require to have a lifestyle that's not in the rice paddy. And they still have 1 billion people in the rice paddy. And all of them trying to get out that rice paddy, and all of them demand energy. So at the end of the day, I wanted to put this slide in on data centers, because data centers consume a boatload of electricity. I guess I shouldn't mention the names, but one of the ones that just been built, it's 100 megawatts to supply, the people in Northern Virginia who make their living off of ones and zeros. But they can't really do that because they want to do greenwash it. They come back to the rural areas and say, look, we're going to put like in Spotsylvania, a 6,000 acre solar farm. 6,000 acres. It is massive, it is huge, it's impressive. But to support a lifestyle in Northern Virginia with $90,000 a year jobs, they have to go to rural Virginia because they want to be green. So what is the conclusion of what Michael said and what we're saying is that we have to stand up and start pushing back to the reality. It is a total carbon footprint of what we're doing, not when you drive it off the lot for EVs. And unicorns and pixie dust don't exist. Neither does this new economy that you hear Ralph Northam talk about, that we're going to electrify everything. Natural gas and coal are the world's principal energy source today, tomorrow, and will continue to be so in the foreseeable future. Nothing, except for uranium, has the energy content of fossil fuels. It's easily transported through pipelines. I mean, think about how that stuff gets to us at our home. You have pipelines, you got tractor trailers, you got rail, all that stuff is transportable. but you're going to be tied, with the all-electric economy, to the grid. There is simply a zero possibility that the world, United States, or Virginia is going to undergo a new transition to a new economy. The other point is single source of failure. We're going to be all electric. And what about the Communist Chinese if we have any kind of national emergency? It's vulnerable to attack. I've been out to California and saw an attack on the grid. It knocked down the local grid, and they were shooting the transformers. Shooting the transformers with armor-piercing 30-06 from a half-mile away. That's how vulnerable our grid is to special forces, Chinese special forces, or Russian special forces. If you take down this grid with, low tech, I'm talking about like an M1 of World War II fame, not today's explosive rounds. The grid's off. The transformer that they shot was $2 million. Nobody had one. They had to borrow one from the East Coast, ship it to the West Coast, because nobody's going to let $2 million worth of inventory sit there for a decade unused. And the last point of all this is vulnerability. None of them made in the United States. They all come from overseas, these size transformers. And it's just the way it is, but why? Because they produce them cheaper, because they don't have some of the environmental regulations. So, I just can't imagine that we're going to standardize on electricity, controlled by a monopoly. It doesn't get the carbon out of the atmosphere any better out of these EVs. And the cure for all this is nuclear. I agree totally with that. And, we just can't seem to get out of the way of ourselves. You reprocess the fuel. 99% of fuel can be reprocessed. France does it. And it just kills me that we go through life talking about all this stuff, wasting all this money and resources, talent, and the solution's right there. They've done it for 40 years with small modular reactor. But the cure comes right back to basic science research. People do not, the government doesn't support, they support applications, but it's just for a simple, why is this way, and support the scientists that spend decades looking at the next thing. And we've got to support basic research to change this trajectory. With that, I'm done. Steve, a little over, but not bad.
I remember reading about that transformer being shot in the Wall Street Journal, so you can probably Google it. Let me also just say that Steve mentioned our YouTube channel. On that channel as well, you'll find that environmental justice warrior making her comments about the Transportation and Climate Initiative. The General Assembly last year approved the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and our next speakers will tell you a little bit more about it and its limitations. Terry Johnson is on the Board of Advisors for the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow and Senior Advisor to the Suburban Virginia Republican Coalition. An attorney, entrepreneur, and management consultant, Johnson was President George W. Bush's choice to lead the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation, previously served as chairman of the Virginia Port Authority and as a member of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which, along with the St. Lawrence Seaway position, required confirmation by the U.S. Senate. I believe I'm supposed to introduce two folks, so I will introduce David Stevenson at the same time. Yes, David is Director of the Center for Energy and Environment at Delaware's Caesar Rodney Institute, our sister organization there. Mr. Stevenson's expertise is in air quality, energy efficiency, and the electric grid. His published works on these topics number in the hundreds and include peer-reviewed studies from both an economic and technical perspective. He is a co-founder of the Energy and Environment Working Group for the State Policy Network and a founder of the Americans for Ocean Protection Coalition, and has trained and served as a consultant to policy experts in 29 states. And we'll start with Terry.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. I want to thank Thomas Jefferson Institute and Virginia Manufacturers Association and the Consumer Trust for putting this together. One of the things that happen in an issue like this is the consumer gets left out of the conversation. I think it's really important that we're here focusing on what all this means to the consumer and how we are going to educate that consumer in some of the things that are going on in the energy sector and the electricity sector. I'm here today, as Chris mentioned, representing the Northern Virginia Republican Coalition and CFACT, but also here for a personal reason I'd like to tell you about a little bit. I graduated from the University of Virginia Law School in 1973, and in 1980 I was appointed by Governor Chuck Robb, a Democrat, to the Virginia Port Authority. And by two subsequent governors, I became chairman of it. And the reason why is because at the time, the Virginia port system and our trade policy was broken. We had 3 ports down around Norfolk that were all competing with each other, and all were privately owned. And of course, back at the time, privately owned is good. So we want to keep them privately owned, and it was a mess. Over the period of 4 years, we changed that. We put it under state ownership. We consolidated a number of things. We worked with organized labor, and we fixed it. And it was a big problem, and I was very proud to be part of the team that went about fixing it. Well, now, 40 years later, we see the same thing. We see a policy that is a mess and broken, and that's the energy policy and electricity policy. And back in the port days, the Democrats fixed it, and now in today's world, the Democrats have created it. So that's why it's important to talk about the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And what it is and what it does. And I'd start by saying it is one of the most misleadingly named pieces of legislation you will find. A lot of legislation is misleadingly claimed, but this one is in particular. So in April of 2020, the Democrat-controlled Assembly went ahead and passed it on a party line vote. I think one of the things that struck me when I read the legislation is that this was really written by the wind and energy lobby. You take a look at the language and you see very similar language in the state of Washington or New York or New Jersey that have similar mandates. And Virginia just happened to be kind of ripe for the picking because it was all one party controlled. And what this did is radically change Virginia's energy policy, which before was a balance of nuclear and natural gas and a little smattering of wind, of solar, but it was rational and reasonable and based on the interest of affordable energy and reliable energy. Well, that all got changed with the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And another thing it did, which is very important, is that for the first time in Virginia's history, it totally eliminated the oversight capability of the State Corporation Commission over the build-out of our energy resources in Virginia. That's never been done before. Since the SCC was put into the Virginia Constitution in the early 1900s. And the legislation did it, and the wind and energy lobby knew what they were doing by declaring that all wind and energy projects are in the public interest. So everything that is built that is wind or solar automatically is going to be something that fits into the legislative directive and is outside the control of the SCC. And when you think about that, that's a pretty stunning thing to happen in Virginia when the one agency that is constitutionally supposed to support and protect consumers is now does not have that authority anymore. I was amazed when I read it, and a lot of people are, I think, still shaking their heads. So, what does the VCEA do? Well, it is going to raise the average Virginia consumer's electricity bill by $800 per year. And that's very clear from our prior speakers and speakers to follow me as to why, because wind and solar is very expensive energy, especially wind. I think David Stevenson will be talking about that. It's also going to create a situation where solar has to be built out at the expense of farmland and forests. The Dominion Energy estimates that there's going to be 490 square miles needed of solar panels in Virginia to fit into the VCEA program. That's equal to 20 times the size of New York City. We're going to have 20 New York City's sized solar factories in Virginia. And if I have to have one quibble with Michael Schellenberger's excellent talk, is he talks about solar farms. They're not farms, they're factories. They are very complicated pieces of machinery put in at great expense onto rural land, which is just like having the factory next door to you. It has nothing to do with being a farm. So this being the case with the VCEA, these two main impacts, we felt that it was very important to have an education campaign. And to do that, we went ahead and created a website, which you will see here, Your Voice in the Fight. We held receptions for all of the Republican candidates for office. We even had one delegate introduce a bill in the last legislation to repeal the VCEA, which got about 3 seconds worth of consideration by the committee that is charged with oversight here. We were notified on Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock that our bill would be considered at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, which really didn't give a whole lot of time for anybody to rationally discuss what the VCEA is and why it needed to be repealed. So another thing that's important to note about the VCEA is that there were no hearings held. There was no scientific discussion. There was no looking into, well, if we do this, what is the temperature of the world going to be impacted by what we do here in Virginia? There was no discussion of what the impacts are going to be. There's no discussion of what the costs were going to be. It was just rammed through by one party because they could. And its object was not helping Virginia. Its object was political power. So in order to educate people, we have to have information. One of the things we did was compile a list that you can see here, the first page of all the solar factories that are proposed for Virginia. There is no other list than this one in Virginia which captures all this information. The Department of Environmental Quality in Virginia, which is ostensibly supposed to be giving permits to the solar project, the people behind the solar projects. They don't have this list, and they don't know, but we do. And when you look at it, you find that there's about 48 projects that are constructed or under construction, but the vast majority, 354 out of the over 400 total, they're in the development stage. You know, I liken what happened in Virginia to the sharks coming in and smelling blood. What a wonderful opportunity for us to come in, and they did, from everywhere, from Japan, from Korea, from Canada, from the UK, from Scotland, from all over. They smelled it, and they came in and they found an environment where they could try to make money. And that is something that I think is very unfortunate for the state that I grew up in and am very fond of. So after we put this list together, we then took a look at, okay, how do we indicate where these solar facilities, factories are located? And this is the next map that we produced, which you can see here. As you get darker in color, you get more density of solar projects. And I should mention that Virginia now is the number one state in the country for solar projects. You know, you would think that maybe this would have something to do with sunshine. It doesn't. Virginia is 24th in terms of states that have solar radiance. But you can see right here that where these factories are located or proposed to be located are basically in the north-south corridor along the transportation corridors and the electricity towers and lines too, and the electricity infrastructure, because all of these solar factories have to be connected to the grid. You can't just pop in the solar factory any place and then expect to have it be part of the grid distribution. And that's a very complicated process that I'll talk about in a little while. But we thought it was important for people to understand that this is what's coming. This is what is going to be in your backyard pretty soon. And once they understand that, then hopefully they're going to be paying attention to what do these solar factories do? What is their what is the impact? What are the things that happen? What are the things that people don't know about solar factories? And so what we did is we put together a video which talks to that in a way that people can relate to. And it is, in fact, titled Things We Didn't Know about solar factories. And we have now, through social media, we have 3,000 playthroughs per day of this video for people in Virginia over the age of 18 who are taking a look. And we're hopeful that this is going to be a very good educational tool. So let's go ahead and
You know, I've heard that solar power may be good for producing electricity here in Virginia.
But there are some things that I didn't know.
I didn't know that Democrats pushed through a law requiring that all our electricity will be generated by solar and wind.
I didn't know that this law will increase my electric bill by $800 a year.
This is your paycheck.
After paying for wind and solar. I didn't know that the law required clear cutting our forests and farmlands.
Almost 500 square miles.
That's 25 million trees.
20 times the size of New York City. There won't be a single tree left standing.
100 million solar panels in Virginia's countryside.
They're all made in China.
All with toxic chemicals.
Copper, selenide.
Silicon tetrachloride.
Cadmium telluride. That one can cause cancer.
Wait, what?
I didn't know that solar and wind don't work in bad weather.
Like in Texas, when everything froze up.
Nobody told me any of this stuff.
But now I know.
This law is bad for people.
It's bad for your paycheck.
And bad for the environment.
And at the end, there's a urge to vote for a particular party that you might be able to guess. So after putting together this video, we still needed to look at all the various factors and facets of this issue. And one of the things that we looked at was where's Dominion Energy in all this? As you know, Dominion supplies about 85% of Virginia electricity. What are they doing? What's their position here? And what we found was that Dominion kind of got tired of fighting a battle to maintain the former rational policy which we had. And they basically went back into the weeds. And they said, look, if the governor and the legislature wants to micromanage energy policy in Virginia, knock yourself out. Go ahead. We'll just simply follow what you do, but we're not going to be out front fighting the battle anymore. And in order to effectuate that, they went ahead and sold virtually all of their natural gas assets to Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway for about $8 billion. Now, that might make you think a little bit. Warren Buffett, one of the smartest investors on the planet, just paid $8 billion for Dominion's natural gas assets. Does he think that natural gas might still be around in the future? I would guess so. And as we get farther on in the discussion, I think he's going to be right because the implementation of 100% wind and solar policy is going to be very problematic. So you have Dominion Energy basically stepping aside. You have the legislature and the governor in control. The next issue then becomes, okay, how is this all going to happen? How, in fact, is practically this going to be implemented? An issue that was never discussed when the legislation was passed. And that then comes to something that a lot of people don't know, but they should. There was established by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in 1999 things called regional transmission organizations. And the regional transmission organizations were put into place because it was thought that it didn't make sense to have North Carolina with policy and Virginia with policy. They should be put together in regions and overseen by these RTOs. There are about 7 of them, and the largest by number of customers is PJM, which you can see there on the right-hand side, which stretches actually all the way from Illinois to Massachusetts through Virginia to North Carolina. It's got a huge area to cover. Now, the thing that's important to know about these RTOs is that they are the ones responsible for the reliability of the system. It's not Dominion Energy, it's not Appalachian Energy, it's these RTOs. And in particular for us, it's PJM. And they are totally under the radar. A lot of people don't know who they are. They're in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. They've got about $350 million in revenue, 1,000 employees. But they're the ones who are going to have to deal with the reliability issue. And you may have heard of RTOs from California, and you may have heard the CAISO and the ones from Texas, ERCOT. And the reason you may have heard about them is because of the blackouts that happened in California and the horrific situation that happened this past winter in Texas with ERCOT, where everything froze up, as the video explains. PJM does not want to be these RTOs. They do not want to have a mess on their hands. And so therefore, what you have is a situation where those 380 plus proposed projects in Virginia have to go through PJM to connect to the grid. They can't go around it. They have to go through PJM. And there's something called the PJM queue, which is the list of projects that PJM has to figure out how are we going to integrate this into the system, and how are we going to do it so it fulfills our responsibility for reliability, which is a very complex process. And the people who are interested in how this process works, like Amazon Web Services. Amazon, as you know, is a buyer of clean energy, which is a whole nother topic and kind of a farce. They understand how this PJM queue is going to work. And as you can see, they say it's going to take about 5 years to clear the volume of projects that are already there. And that doesn't even include the projects that are going to be coming up in the future. And Virginia, by far, has the largest number of projects that have to be cleared by PJM. So it is going to be some time, perhaps 5 to 7 years is indicated down in the lower left, before the merchant class that is putting together these solar factories, before they can clear the PJM queue, which is going to be a definite problem. So even after they clear the queue, they're going to have construction issues as well. So if you're a supervisor of a county where a solar project is being proposed, and you think that, oh, well, you know what, we're going to be getting revenue from this because we're going to change the zoning, and there's going to be a ribbon cutting that I'll be part of, and I'll get my picture taken, you better think again. You have a long period to wait before this is actually going to happen. I think this is actually part of the reason why Dominion is in the background, because they understand that a lot of these things are not going to make it through the PJM queue. And, you know, the interesting thing is, where have we seen this movie before, where you have a particular party take an ideology and push it through to a point where it creates a mess in terms of public policy? And we've seen it with the Republicans, with the savings and loan deregulation and the mess that caused. And we've seen with the Democrats. We had the Community Reinvestment Act, where the Democrats basically said to the banks, okay, we're going to force you to make loans to people who can't pay them back in order for you to grow. And the banks said, okay, but we're not going to hold this paper. We're going to sell it to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or we'll securitize it and we'll sell it to the general public under the age-old theory that, we lose money on every project, but we'll make it up on volume. The issue is going to come down to the election coming up in November, on November 2nd. Governor McAuliffe has been very clear. He wants to double down. Instead of having all solar and wind by 2045, he wants to have it by 2035, and he wants the merchant class to have a slice of the pie of not 35%, but 45%. And then you have Mr. Youngkin, candidate Youngkin, a businessman who understands how things work, who understands where problems are and understands how it is needed to fix them. And he's made his position pretty clear. We need an electric grid which is stable. We need to change direction. And we want something that's doable and affordable and good for Virginia. So, in summary, the takeaways are the Virginia energy policy, public policy is highly politicized. At the present, anyone who knows about electricity and knows how it actually works knows that it is unsustainable and unachievable and ruinous. And they know that PJM has this massive backup in their queue that's going to take years and years to solve. And they know that, and we know that the coming election is going to be a decider of energy policy. So we will find out very shortly. So thank you. There's our website and how you can get a hold of us. And I appreciate your attention. Thank you very much.
I'm David Stevenson with the Caesar Rodney Institute. It's a state think tank, but I guess I couldn't stay within one state, and Delaware is pretty small, so I've been helping other states. One of the things I work on, if you want to go with the start the slide presentation, is what goes on with integrated resource plans. That's what the utilities use to decide how they're going to meet the power demands of their customers in the future. I've been involved in a lot of those. I've read a lot, and you're going to learn some new things today. I'm going to correct a few things. The other thing we're going to do is look at offshore wind, which is something I'm spending a lot of time on right now. So, first of all, offshore wind. Those big orange areas are the lease areas that have been approved by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which I like to call the bad Ocean Energy Management Organization. That's where all these wind projects are going to be built. If you look up at the very top, just off Nantucket, you see it's actually 7 different leases on top of each other. One important part of that is the first in the country industrial-sized project is one little tiny slice of that, and that's the one that's going to set the model for all the rest of the approvals. So we'll talk about the lawsuit we're using to stop that. If you go all the way down near the bottom, you see the one off Virginia and the one off North Carolina. To meet Dominion Power's mandate for offshore wind, they're going to start with that one off Virginia, but they're going to need the one off North Carolina to be able to meet that entire requirement. So like Delaware, which is not currently subsidizing offshore wind, North Carolina is going to be stuck with all the bad aspects of having offshore wind, but the power will all go to Dominion in Virginia. So President Biden wants 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. What does that mean? It's a $100 billion investment, 2,500 skyscraper-sized turbines off every major tourist beach. And when we talked about skyscrapers, the current ones are 850 feet tall, size of the Chrysler Building. But Europe has already approved the next size. It's 1,100 feet, the size of the Eiffel Tower, and all the developers are jumping on whatever the biggest turbine is, so we're going to see those here. What we're talking about is $500 billion in net negative economic impact from these guys. You've got probably a net loss of 145,000 jobs if all of these get built. Going to have higher electric rates, lost tourism, abandoned prime commercial fishing areas the size of the state of Connecticut. Here's an interesting one for you, and let me put this $250 billion headed to Europe in perspective. Look this up, got it from Wikipedia. The Spanish conquistadors took out about $500 billion worth of treasure out of the Americas when they took over the New World. Over 300 years. These wind developers are going to take half of that in 20 years. And the projects don't end at 20 years, by the way. That's the contracts, the first contracts are. So how are we going to stop this? This is where the lawsuit comes into play. I pretty much was the instigator of forming the American Coalition for Ocean Protection. We've got groups right now from North Carolina to Maine. Thomas Jefferson Institute has joined. I'm very thankful for that here in Virginia. We do need a beach community group, maybe in Virginia Beach, to round that off. We established a joint legal defense fund. This has just been done. In 2 weeks, I raised $75,000 in matching challenge grants. These lawsuits are going to cost $100 to $150 grand a piece. We're going to have several of them going on. And we're trying to raise $500,000. If you'd like to go to the website and donate, we'd appreciate it. It's a matching grant, so every dollar you give will be matched by another dollar. So the first lawsuit was filed August 25th. We're going to try to reverse this first industrial project, and if we do that, it's going to slow them all down. Now, this lawsuit will probably take a year in Federal District Court 1, and then whoever loses will challenge it, and it'll be another year for the appeal. So we've just pushed this back, hopefully, at least 2 years, and it's going to get everybody else thinking, including the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, about when they approve the next project.
Who did you sue? Who did you sue?
We sued the federal government. We sued the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and I'll get into the basis of the suit in a second. And we assumed NOAA Fisheries for not taking care of the Endangered Species Act. So here's some of the basis for the lawsuits. Incidental killing of the critical endangered North Atlantic right whale is allowed in this approval. They're saying, well, we don't think there's going to be any whales killed, but we're going to absolve the developer if they happen to kill a whale. They don't have to do anything about it. And this is the one that was talked about in Schellenberger's video. To put this in perspective, 2 weeks ago, there was just new regulations put out about the lobster fishermen having to totally change in the way they work in a way that may kill the industry in Maine to protect the whale, because according to NOAA Fisheries, the same group that gave this little tidbit out, said the northern Atlantic right whale can't stand one more stressor. But we're going to let these wind farms be built. There's seabed changes. When they put all these cables, I mean, hundreds of miles of cables for each lease, you've got to cover it with something. They wind up putting beds of concrete over it. Around the turbines themselves, you need acres and acres of concrete and stone so that the scouring movement of the tides and shifting of the ocean currents doesn't topple these things by moving all the sand away. You also wind up with operational noise and construction noise, and it affects all kinds of, it's not just the whales, it's affecting everything. In some areas off in the North Sea where these have been built, there's basically nothing left for the bottom of the food chain. These turbines sweep out an area 8 football fields large, 180 mile per hour at the tips. They're going to kill birds, including things like endangered species, the red knot flies from southern Argentina up to the Arctic every year. They're going to go right up the mid-Atlantic flyway where all the other migrating birds are, and they're going to go right through all these lease areas. Tell me they're not going to kill millions of birds.
The wind tip speed ratio.
Yeah. So the abandonment of historic prime commercial fishing grounds, along with lost ability to establish take limits. Now, literally, in the record of decision, BOEM says, we think it's going to have a moderate impact on the fishermen, but by the way, they're probably just going to abandon the lease area like they have in Europe. And they said, all these, you need to have take limits. They have to do a population count. So what happens? They admit they have destroyed the way they do the population count. You can't fly low to the ocean when you've got a 1,000-foot turbine sitting there. So they said, well, the president has told us to get this approval done, and it'll take too long to figure out a new process for determining take limits. So we're going to set up a committee and we'll figure it out after the fact. And that's pretty much what they're doing with all these things. We'll figure out after these get built what the problems are. Turbines, by their, BOEM again did a study. Their definition is these will dominate the skyline at 15 miles. In reaction, the state of New York created a 20-mile exclusion zone. A lease area that used to be off the Hamptons was canceled because of that, and BOEM agreed. That was 12 miles off the coast. They've stopped them from 20. Nantucket's 14 miles. Delaware and Maryland are 10. New Jersey's 10. And yet they're not canceling those because we have studies that show up to 38% of tourists won't come back. It's basically what happened to the beach economy in the COVID pandemic is going to be every year. And they say, okay, we're going to interfere with vessel pathways and radaring problems. They admit they're going to increase vessel collisions, and the fact that the Coast Guard is not going to be able to do search and rescue missions the way they do because they have to fly higher. And with all that, they still didn't kill it. So all these are a basis for a lawsuit. And we think we have a very good chance of winning this and certainly getting the court's attention to delay things. So I went on and looked at the Virginia Clean Energy Act. And by the way, this is the same thing that's going through the U.S. Congress right now with this $3.5 trillion budget. It's the same plan. And it's going to have the same impact. So you start with legislation, you move to regulation, then the utilities, action like Dominion Power, figure out what it's going to cost. We won't know what that $3.5 trillion project is going to cost until we get it to the utilities. But we have this window now. Dominion's already looked at it. So, electric bill increases. Now, it turns out, you guys have been throwing that $800 number around. That's the one that Dominion put on the big slide. But then Dominion, while I agree that they have given up fighting these things, in their document, they buried all these other things. So what they did, they were given by the Utility Commission that you have to use these assumptions. Well, Dominion put in these are not the right assumptions. Here's the assumptions we would have used. If you use the assumptions they would have used, it's $1,400 a year, doubling utility rates. And for commercial and industrial, it goes up about 50%. So you see these range numbers. So it's things like, I won't give you all of them, but the average residential customer actually uses 1,100 kilowatt hours per year. Utility Commission told them to use 1,000. 10% difference, right there, one item. Another one is they're going to spread these costs to North Carolina customers. No, they're not. And there were several. You can only consider the capital cost of the direct development of all these projects. They forgot the $12.5 billion of distribution and transmission funds, which add another 25% to the bill. So when you get done taking all of the real things into consideration, those are the real numbers that are going to cost, not the ones that were on that little graph that Dominion did. So economic growth is going to falter. We've already seen what happens with this. When New England and the northern mid-Atlantic states adopted the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and started adding carbon taxes, when we compared the RGGI states to similar states that had similar policies except for RGGI, those states, those energy-intensive businesses like steel mills and data plants and car assembly plants and chemical manufacturing and oil refineries, they left. So they lost, from 2007 to 2019, 34% of their energy-intensive businesses, and good manufacturing in total came down 20%. By the way, the U.S. Energy Information Agency for the country projects almost no electricity growth over the next 20 years. But Dominion has about a 20% increase. Turns out when you read all the little footnotes and everything, that entire growth is based on tripling the number of data centers, which are just huge users. Well, data centers, because they're huge users, are the most sensitive to higher electric rates. You're going to take industrial rates from 6 cents to 9 cents a kilowatt hour. There's nobody going to build a data center in Virginia when they can do it for 6 cents in West Virginia. It's just not going to happen. Disposable income is going to falter as well. Delaware's has stalled. We've actually seen income fall in Delaware since the year 2000 because we've done all these crazy things in Delaware that Virginia wants to do now. So, for example, when we lost those steel mill jobs, that was 300 jobs at $75,000 a year. Well, we've replaced them with Amazon fulfillment centers at $30,000 a year. That's what's going to happen in Virginia. You're going to lose all the high-paying blue-collar jobs. It's going to really impact folks in the state. And reliable generation, right now, 95% of Virginia's electricity comes from reliable sources, things you can dispatch, you can turn on. You're going to drop to 45%, and this is just by 2035 when you're only 60% of the way there to this 100% target. You've got another 40% to go. And reliance on imports, it's already ridiculous that you're importing 25%. You're going to be up to 40%, but where are you going to get it? Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. I was talking about all the same programs that are in this program. Who are you going to import it from? They're all cutting back. So there's not going to be any place to import it from in the PJM network. This is just a recipe for disaster. So let's take a look at the benefit. Here you go. The EPA has a calculator that you can put in the amount of carbon dioxide you're going to save, and it'll print out the reduction in global temperatures by the year 2050 or 2100. So I did that. First of all, it's a 1/1000th of a degree reduction. So I put the two charts up here. One bar is before and one is after. Can you tell the difference? No, you cannot, and there won't be any difference. Even that entire 30 gigawatts that Biden wants, it's only 4/1000ths, and the chart looks exactly the same. I've done both charts. You still can't tell which is the before and which is the after. So I think with that, a lot of the charts from here are duplicates of other information. This is the close-up of Dominion's lease area, what they're going to do. All those little yellow dots are the turbines. One other thing I'd like to share with you. Let's say that you really still want to get rid of this 14 million tons of carbon dioxide by 2035. Is there a better way to do it? So Dominion's planning to invest $57 billion to do the current plan. And it's that capital cost that drives the rise in electric rates. It's almost 1-to-1. So how do we do that? So here's an idea. Instead of $57 billion, we can do it for $7 billion. And that's using new technology to capture the carbon coming in the flue gas. It's expensive, but it sure is a lot less expensive than this. You would do it on existing coal and natural gas plants, so all those plants would stay in operation. The carbon dioxide gets compressed, sent in the pipeline. It can get sent to the Marcellus Shale area. It can be used to enhance oil and gas production, which means you have to drill fewer wells because you can enhance what's coming out of the existing ones. Put it in perspective, I did an analysis in the state of Michigan. Back in '79, oil production peaked at 75 million barrels a year. It's now down to 4, but you could probably recover most of that if you were pumping carbon dioxide down into the ground. Carbon dioxide stays there, the oil and natural gas comes out. So you can do something like that. Not only is it a lot cheaper to do, but you can actually recover the cost because you got a couple of ways to do that. You can, first of all the natural gas and coal plants in Virginia now are paying the RGGI tax, regional greenhouse tax. Well, that's going to average $18 a ton over the next 10 years, really, basically 10 years. So this carbon capture costs between $65 and $75 a ton. So you get $18 back from not having to pay RGGI. You get $35 back from a federal income tax subsidy. And then when you sell it to the oil and gas drillers, you get another $30. So you actually wind up making money on these things instead of spending money. So you really need to go back and get rid of the legislation. But if you want to set a target, set the darn target and let the industry figure out the best way to do it instead of micromanaging and saying you've got to use unbelievably expensive offshore wind, solar, and storage is even worse. So that's the real answer. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve. And thank you again for allowing me to be here.
I have one final presentation, and since we are a little behind, I'm going to intentionally speed it up just a little bit. So again, I'm going to talk about 3 things. The regional greenhouse gas initiative, I'll speak about it very briefly. Something we haven't mentioned so far, which is called PIPP, PIP, the percentage of income payment plan, and then I will talk a little bit more about these SCC cost projections that several people have mentioned. So again, RGGI is exactly like TCI, except it's for power plants, not cars. Dominion and Appalachian Power Company and anybody else in Virginia that produces electricity with a power plant that uses natural gas or coal or some other fossil fuel has to buy allowances to sort of run through the process. Those allowances are for sale 3 or 4 times a year, and beginning with this year, beginning with the first auction in 2021, Dominion and the others have started buying allowances. And beginning with your September bill, and again, let me show you this. This shows the plants. When they were doing this process through the regulation, this shows where the plants are in Virginia that need to buy RGGI allowances. And as you can see, the vast majority of them are Dominion plants. There are a few merchant plants. There's one major APCO plant. And the other thing you will see is what's missing, and that is Dominion's largest coal plant, Mount Storm, which is in West Virginia and therefore is exempt from RGGI. So again, Governor McAuliffe, you can thank him for our membership in RGGI. He started the process when he was in office the first time. But when he promised to do it, he said, we're going to do this in such a way that the money that's captured by these RGGI taxes rolls back to the consumer. We're going to put it on the electric bill as a rebate. Guess what? That didn't happen. And there's been a fair amount of maneuvering over the years between the General Assembly parties on RGGI, but in 2020, as part of the Virginia Clean Economy Act and another bill called the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act, we joined RGGI. In the first 2 auctions, the Virginia firms, and it's like 90-some% Dominion, I don't have the number, but it's mostly Dominion, purchased 11.4 million allowances and spent $89 million. In an auction last week, the price jumped 17% in one auction to $9.30 a ton. And David's prediction that it's going to get up to $15, $18 a ton is perfectly within range of what most people are expecting. So again, how are you paying for it? So far, you're only paying for it directly if you're a Dominion Energy customer. But beginning this month, you're paying $2.39 for every 1,000 kilowatt hours you use. You're paying it whether you're residential, whether you're commercial, whether you're industrial. There's no price break for the large users. It is a flat fee. Dominion's $2.39 charge per 1,000 will collect about $168 million. Again, with the price going to $9.30 in just one auction, trust me, they'll be back next year, they'll true it up, and they'll be collecting even more. It's going to be a lot more than $2.39 per thousand. Small generators, they're on their own, and this is really what's most important to the folks who hate hate CO2. Anybody who's thinking hard about building a new generating plant in the RGGI territory, they know they have to get into that auction and compete against everybody else for a shrinking pool of allowances. The money will be spent on 45% on behalf of localities that have sea level rise and flooding issues, and that's not a bad way to use it, because there's no question that there are flooding issues, even without a belief in a huge sea level rise. Obviously, lots of parts of Virginia are vulnerable to flooding. And the other 50%, here we go again, support low-income energy efficiency programs, including programs for eligible housing development. So again, half the money is being spent basically to help the folks who can't afford to pay the higher rates because of the taxes. So it's actually fairly circular. And that's just a chart of one of the RGGI auctions, and we'll skip over that. The percentage of income payment plan. So again, I'll give the advocates for this credit. They understand what they're doing to people's electric bills, and they understand who loses the most. The low-income families cannot afford this. So they created this, and they didn't invent it. Virginia's not the first state to do this, but basically it's an income transfer program. It's a part of the safety net. You call it a welfare program. Every customer in Dominion and APCO territory, again, beginning this month, is paying a little extra on your bill into a fund. That fund will be used to subsidize the bills of lower income folks. I don't expect that to start till, again, about 2023. What you're paying for now is just the money to set the whole thing up. It'll be run by the state. To qualify, you just have 150% of federal poverty, and you get your electric bill capped. If your electric bill is more than 6%, if you don't have electric heat, more than 10%. If you do have electric heat, the rest of us will pay the bill for you. Again, a truly universal fee. Every customer will pay it, and every customer will pay the same. It's a huge hit on the big industrial users. So this is the chart everybody talks about, the $808 in increased cost due to the Virginia Clean Energy Plan. And the way I read this, of course, it's not all due to the Virginia Clean Energy Plan, but it's also not all done. This is just through 2030, not through 2035. And David mentioned several assumptions that were probably wrong when they made this projection. And another one that everybody kind of forgets is when the SCC does these things, they do not factor in inflation. There's no inflation factor. These are in constant dollars. So if it's $800 a year in 2020 dollars or 2021 dollars, you can imagine what it's going to be in actual 2030 dollars. And now we're looking at 4, 5, even 6% based inflation. So again, if you are one of those customers and you're paying just the RGGI and the PIP, the RGGI and the PIP combined, and you're using 1,000 kilowatt hours, which is not what people use, but that's what they're using, $42 a year between the two for residential, $255 for a small commercial, $250,000 for one of the smaller industries in the Virginia Manufacturing Association or somebody else. And again, that's off the bat. That is not what it's going to be in 2030. So let's add all this up, and then Brett will come up and conclude the program. You've got the TCI carbon tax that's proposed, it's not in place yet, but proposed for gasoline and diesel. Say that does add $700 a year to the cost of living in Virginia for an average family. I'm not getting into industrial commercial, just for Joe Sixpack and his family living in a neighborhood in Virginia. And then the VCEA and all the other related costs of the energy transformation that we've discussed, $800 a year. The PIP energy tax, another $14 or $15 a year. That adds up already to $1,550 a year, about $130 a month for the average working family. That is a lot of money just to use 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, which is not a lot of electricity. Will you need to buy an electric car? You might, because they want very much for you to buy an electric car. Will you need to convert your house to all electric and sell off your gas appliances? Get rid of your gas furnace, get rid of your gas dryer. Some people use gas for dryers. Hot water. That's right, hot water. You think that's crazy? You want to talk crazy? Yesterday, the City Council of Richmond City passed a resolution, in which they claim they are going to get rid of their gas utility. In deference to climate change, they are going to get out of the natural gas business. There's no discussion of who will replace natural gas for the literal tens of thousands of customers, me included, who use Richmond City gas in their homes, their shops, and their industries. So that's what we've done to Virginia. That's what's coming, and I appreciate you taking time to sit here and listen, and I will let Brett Vassy close it down.
And as Brett comes up, because we thought he's a good person to close this out with what to do with actionable information, having 5,300 members, I want to be clear that our interest is not in who is elected or in the party that they belong to, but that those who are in public office understand the consequences of their actions and understand the right thing to do and act on the right thing to do. So to protect the interests of all Virginians, whether they are low income, high income, and whatever they use. So thank you, and thank all of you for coming.
Well, folks, you made it to the end. Thank you for hanging in there. I know this was data intensive, but let me close up with a couple of things. One, Virginia has been blessed with economic prosperity for a long time. We have citizens and businesses that don't quite understand how fast we've moved and how far we've moved to a more New England and West Coast politic. But I hope today has clearly communicated to you all in a nonpartisan fashion that we have already passed the Green New Deal in Virginia. It's done. The question is, what do we do with it now? And let me recite them so that you can understand how a very sophisticated multi-state network of advocates funded by millionaires and billionaires out of Charlottesville, Northern Virginia, New York, and California were able to get this done in 2 very short years. They've now passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act, the Clean Energy and Community Preparedness Act, the Percentage of Income Act, and the TCI, only just known in Virginia as the Low Emissions, Zero Emissions Vehicle Act. They're all codified. And what we also hope you understand and take away from today is that these advocates absolutely understand and have implemented a sophisticated strategy around the fact that litigation, legislation, regulation, and rationing have a direct impact on leaving one preferred source of energy and fuel with no consideration of cost. Further, we hope that the scorecard that we are publishing in a few weeks, but you've gotten to see a little bit of the insight, we hope you get to see that the actual premise on which these promises were built is false. Virginia has, through its own innovation and ingenuity, we have improved our environment since 1990. We have exceeded the Northeast, and in many cases, even the West Coast, and we are by far exceeding our Southeast competitors. And we've done it in a way by protecting our rates as well. We're not the lowest, but we're not the highest. But we're trending in the wrong direction, and we're not competitive right now in residential and industrial rates against our southern competitors. And we have now, as you've heard, a $56 billion, which could grow to a $100 billion price tag to pay by 2030 in front of us. What we have to do, and our call to action, and why we did this, is to call you all to action to bend that cost curve starting tomorrow. We need you to reach out to 5 people you know and share this presentation with them. It'll be served on the TGI website and their YouTube channel. It'll be on the Virginia Consumer Energy Trust's website. It'll be on the VMA's website, and I'm sure it will be on the Northern Virginia Republicans' website as well. We're trying to expand this to anyone that will share the information. It will be broken up into modules, so you can watch Mr. Schollenberger and his great presentation and each one of the individual presentations so it's more watchable. So number one, we want you to share it with 5 people. And we'll be sending messages to you when it's ready. The second thing we want you to do is call your local elected officials, your senator and your delegate, and we want you to ask them questions that we pose today. What is going to be the environmental benefit? How are you going to protect against these costs to go up? Are there alternatives that you would be willing to consider? Those are all fair questions of your elected official. And then give all of us who are in this advocacy world feedback. And then finally, money matters. This is an election year. Put your money where it matters. Find those elected officials that share your goals of being good environmental stewards and also being concerned about the economy. Those are not mutually exclusive concepts. Never accept that as a false choice. So we hope we've armed you with that information. Use it in the marketplace, use it with your friends and family, but get 5 people out, educate them, motivate them to action, and then finally make sure that you are helping to elect people that are going to protect your interests, protect the environment, and do both, because it is achievable. American ingenuity can accomplish it. Virginia is an example. We can do better than the Northeast, and I guarantee you we can do better than the West Coast. We do not want to go down that path. We can do it better. The Virginia way's always been the better way. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. We have one more question, and we're good. We're out. Thank you, folks. Have a great day.